I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. On behalf of my colleagues at the Trib, I want to welcome you to this year's Texas Tribune Festival. Every one of our 11 years in business, the work of our nonprofit newsroom has been critically important, but never more than in 2020. We produce reliable, credible reporting on issues that affect everyday Texans, making them better informed and motivating them to participate civically. You and people like you, readers, supporters, attendees at our events, make our public service journalism possible. If you value what we do, now is a great time to support us. Every dollar you donate up to $20,000 by September 30th will be matched by the Lowy Law Firm in Austin, and they'll give another $20,000 to the Central Texas Food Bank. Learn more and contribute today at texastribune.org/give. Now on with the show. I hope you enjoy this conversation, programmed in partnership with our friends at Politico, between U.S. Representative Dan Crenshaw of Texas and Tim Alberta, Chief Political Correspondent for Politico.
I'm Tim Alberta, the Chief Political Correspondent for Politico, and it's a pleasure to be joined by Dan Crenshaw, the Congressman from Texas' 2nd District. Mr. Crenshaw, nice to see you. How are you doing today?
Great. How you doing, Tim?
I'm hanging in there. Tough loss for the Lions, unfortunately, this afternoon, but we're getting past it. I want to start with your neck of the woods out there, Harris County, Texas. It's where your congressional district is located, where you're coming from today. You know, George W. Bush wins Harris County twice, and by about 110,000 votes each time. And then Barack Obama wins it twice, albeit very narrowly. And in 2012, matter of fact, he beats Mitt Romney by about 600 votes out of more than 1 million cast. Fast forward to 2016, Hillary Clinton beats Donald Trump by 162,000 votes in Harris County. So over those 3 elections, you're looking at this massive reversal of vote share for the 2 major parties in Harris County. And that's got to be a terrifying trend line for Republicans. What do you see happening there politically, economically, culturally that explains that trend line, and how do you reverse it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not a political pundit. I'm a politician. I represent people. I look at policy. I obviously have to look at some of these trend lines as I campaign, but this is not my expertise, frankly. You and your fellow reporters are going to have a much more fun and informed conversation talking about demographics and changes in elections and all that. I haven't been involved in politics except for the last 2 years. So I just want to premise this question with that fact. It's no secret that in the suburbs, and especially amongst women, they're simply turned off by Donald Trump. Does this mean they're turned off by Republicans? Does this mean they're not center-right voters anymore? No, not necessarily. Not at all, actually. And it's pretty obvious to me as I talk to people on a daily basis, in these suburban areas around Harris County, for instance, that people are definitely center-right voters. But they don't want to vote for Donald Trump. They have their own reasons for that. It's personal to them. So I think that remains true. It's also true, as you know, over the last 20 years, as you lay out the statistics that you just did, that Republicans and Democrats have moved along these urban and rural divides to an enormous extent. That wasn't always true in America, but it's very true now. For whatever reason, as people pack themselves into cities and live in apartments, they tend to vote more Democrat. Why that is a very interesting question. I live amongst these people. I live in an apartment in the city. So I know exactly who these people are. And we get along quite well. That's in Houston. I think it's safe to say that in my apartment in DC, I'm overwhelmingly surrounded by people who would never vote for me. Here in Houston, it's a much more mixed crowd. They're younger. They tend to vote Democrat when they're younger, but they're definitely reachable. And I think we just need to have more candidates in the GOP that connect with them on just a personal level. In politics, we tend to overthink the policies and what people are looking at. Honestly, a lot of it's just personal connection.
And so when you have those conversations with some of those suburban voters and you say, they're center right, but they're not going to vote for Trump and they have their reasons. What are the reasons? What do you most frequently hear from those voters when you talk with them?
They have a personal dislike for him. It's just that simple. I think you intuitively know that. Yeah, they just don't like them. I mean, it's as simple as that. We don't need to delve into it more than that.
And your sense is that that these voters are not in the midst of a longer drift away from the Republican Party, that this is a fleeting phenomenon that's unique to Trump, but that when Trump is no longer in the picture, that these are still fundamentally Republican voters?
Perhaps I could argue both sides of that. It depends on the person. But I do think suburban voters are clearly center-right voters. Okay, they want safe communities, they want personalized healthcare, they want some choice in their healthcare, they want an economy that actually works, they want job growth, they don't want to tax their businesses excessively, they don't want to be taxed excessively, they want strong borders, they want to be tough on China. These are center-right voters through and through. If I ask them these simple questions about policy and don't attach a political party to it, they're center-right voters. It's just, I think it's fundamentally true. But, like we stated, it's not everybody votes based on political platforms. That's how I vote, but it's not how everybody votes.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you about one policy in particular that obviously Texas is always going to be front and center with questions about immigration. We had a government shutdown at the beginning of your first term over issues of border security. You have, to my knowledge, laid out pretty clear positions on the wall, for instance, and some other border matters. But there's one specific thing I want to ask you about. In my time covering Congress, we've seen twice in the last 15 years a proposal to grant a pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants that has had bipartisan support, but ultimately one was defeated by the left, one was defeated by the right. And I'm curious if in the next several years a similar proposal were to come up that would, in addition to securing the border, grant that pathway to citizenship for the estimated 12 million or so illegal immigrants. Would you support that?
No, I mean, I think Republicans are pretty well established that we do want a deal for dreamers. I think people feel a sense of justice for people who are brought here as children through no fault of their own. They don't even speak Spanish. That there's a path to citizenship for them. My simple request in exchange for that is an actual assertion that we care about border security and illegal immigration. Like, you have to stop the inflow. We're actually almost there. Under this administration has done a really good job. We're not quite there yet. We still need to have some congressional action on loopholes, et cetera, but we're almost there. And so that conversation is much easier to have. But, this notion that we just have to give citizenship to 12 million, and it could be upwards of, according to many other estimates, for people who broke the law willingly and cut in front of the line of millions of other legal immigrants who sought to do it the right way, my stepmother being one of them. Everybody knows somebody who's done it the right way. This is not fair to them. This is immoral. This is not okay. These people aren't clamoring for citizenship. Anybody who wants them to have citizenship is simply looking for their vote. It's 100% true. These people maybe want work visas. All right. There's interesting conversations you could be had about that. Paying some kind of fee or something that at least people can feel like that injustice has been punished and moved past. So there's reasonable conversations that can be had, but not passed to citizenship. I'm sorry, that cuts in front of millions of people who are waiting on that.
So, and it sounds like, one of the interesting conversations that could be had there, if I'm reading you correctly, is there have been some conservative Republicans in recent years who have said, we could have a conversation about citizenship for dreamers, but permanent legal status for everyone else. That's something that you'd be willing to entertain?
Yeah, with a lot of caveats, like I just noted. It's very hard to get there. People, the American public isn't necessarily ready for it. They have to feel like illegal immigration is being taken seriously, and they have not felt that way yet. Under this presidency, they've felt more like that than ever before. And like I said, we've actually done a lot of work that's really impressive to tamp down on the border crossings. But I don't think we're there yet. But to answer your question, generally, that is the direction. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to read a passage from your book, Fortitude, which was a big bestseller. Congratulations on that. You've got a number of striking passages in that book, and I wish we could have a long conversation about all of them. I want to read one in particular. You wrote, quote, "The problem with today's society is that it is swelling with the wrong role models. Sometimes we mistakenly look up to and emulate the wrong hero attributes entirely, abandoning traditional heroes for new and exciting villains who represent self-indulgence, loudmouthed commentary, angry fist-shaking activism, or insulting Spitfire politics," unquote. What I'm curious about, you've been in Congress now for, you're coming to a close in your first term. And as you said earlier, you're not a long-time politician. You're new to this game. From your experience thus far, should Americans and should American children, should they even consider politicians to be role models?
Well, if you read the rest of that book, I think that what you just quoted is from the intro. And then I have a whole chapter on hero archetypes. And this is a really important conversation. So the point I'm making here is that we sort of reversed hero archetypes, right? Whereas we used to see, a hero, and I use the word archetype very carefully because I'm talking about attributes. I'm not talking about people specifically. So which sort of neuters the point on whether it should be politicians or not. That's irrelevant to me. I'm not saying it shouldn't be politicians. I'm not saying it should. I'm not saying you should even have a hero that you look up to. I'm saying you should have heroic attributes that you look up to. And sometimes politicians might embody those heroic attributes. Sometimes they don't. That's why I talk in terms of archetypes. So an archetype meaning sort of a set of ideals or attributes that we can structure our ideas around. Again, heroism should mean overcoming adversity. It should not mean victimhood. Okay, we've elevated victimhood as a virtue. That's the point I'm making in that chapter, and it leads to a lot of, I think, the subsequent chapters that are important when we think about how we should make ourselves more mentally tough. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the book, is to make ourselves personally tougher and culturally tougher. And one way to do that is to provide a vision statement. And that's what I mean by creating a hero archetype. But then I have to define, because of these trends in our culture, I have to define what I mean. What is a sense of good, and what is a good hero, and what is a bad hero? I wouldn't have had to define. If I'd written that book 20 years ago, I don't think I would have had to define that. It would have been obvious. It was set pretty well in our pop culture, in our politics, in our conversations. These days, that is fundamentally not true. And so I had to define it, which is why I expressed it that way.
So that makes sense. But it strikes me that looking out for those attributes instead of looking at individuals is noble in theory, but it's a bit unrealistic, because especially for kids, there are certain figures and certain classes of individuals in this culture who are always going to be more visible than others. And, Charles Barkley famously cut the ad where he said, "I am not a role model." And then he wrote a book about it saying, he doesn't want basketball players to be role models. And he laid out his reasons for why. And I am curious, just as a class of individuals, should elected officials, should politicians, people who almost inherent to their job description is the need to sort of compromise themselves at times because they see something as a means to an end, should we be discussing politicians as role models in modern American society?
It depends on the politician. I mean, I probably haven't read Charles Barkley's book. It sounds like I would kind of agree with him. Kind of. I need to read it, but it depends on the person. I wouldn't tell somebody, no, you cannot have a class of role models in this way. Like, here's what I say in my book: you shouldn't respect or look up to everything about one single person. I think you should look up to me as a role model when it comes to politics and maybe military service, right? Okay, so that might be one thing. But don't listen to me if I'm talking to you about how to play basketball. I don't know what I'm talking about. I could try, and I could sound really authoritative about it, and I could really make a case, but I don't really know what I'm talking about. Just like celebrities don't know what they're talking about when they talk about politics. But if you want to listen to them on how to be a pop singer and how to work really hard and get good at acting, I don't know, maybe you should listen to them. They're good along a certain hierarchy. I talk about this in the book: social hierarchies, academic hierarchies, sports hierarchies. Everybody moves up a hierarchy in our society. We have various hierarchies, and they're usually merit-based. It should be merit-based anyway. Now, what you should do for self-betterment is to take note of those hierarchies and copy what people do when you see that they've moved to the top of one. So this is a bit psychological. It's a bit of a self-help point, but it's not as simple as like, don't look up to NBA players and don't look up to politics or politicians. It's not that simple.
I agree with you, but the psychology of it's fascinating because so you and I are about the same age, right? And I know that, speaking for myself, and tell me if this was not the case in your adolescence, but it feels like a real watershed of my political awareness as far as the polarization in this country was the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And I grew up in a conservative household. I can still remember hearing from my parents and their peers that morality is a real prerequisite for, political leadership, particularly at the highest levels. And it's interesting because after Donald Trump won in 2016, I had that conversation with a lot of evangelical leaders in particular who said very candidly, you know what, in my experience over the last 20 years or so, that sentiment has really faded for a lot of voters, that they simply no longer feel that way anymore. And maybe that's hypocritical, maybe it's opportunistic, whatever the case may be. And so that's why I'm asking you whether we as Americans, in your judgment, have almost reached a tipping point where we no longer should even think about these political leaders as role models for our children, as people who are, to your point a minute ago, Donald Trump has obviously achieved the pinnacle of American political power, but I'm not sure many people would call him a role model.
Some people would. I know a lot of good people who are in politics, who I think do great things. I know a lot of bad people. I think you should look up to attributes that are inherently good, but you need to define what it means to be good, which is why I so expressly write about that in the book. And I just wouldn't put ourselves in a box. Do or do not look up to politicians.
Would you call Donald Trump a role model? You said some people would. I said many people wouldn't. Would you call him a role model?
I would say no. I would adhere to my own principles in the book, which is I admire some of his attributes and I don't admire others. I can hold multiple thoughts in my head about somebody. I do not hold a single hero, like a named hero, except maybe Jesus, right? Because he embodies the perfect person. But other than that, it is, and I say this expressly in the book, it is not safe to label anybody as your hero. Doesn't mean they're not role models along a certain hierarchy. Donald Trump has done many things that are good. He's done many things that I can't defend. Right. So he's a model for some things and not others. It is as simple as that, just like everybody is, because people are complex individuals.
Mm-hmm. So another theme of your book is the outrage culture. And what I'm curious about, Congressman, as someone who personally agrees with much of your writing in that regard and who believes that the outrage culture has sort of become the end itself rather than the means to some end. I can't shake the feeling that the big problem with outrage culture is that it ultimately desensitizes us to the things that are really worth being outraged about. That if everything is worth being outraged about, then nothing's worth being outraged about. So here's what I want to know. In the last 4 or 5 years, it strikes me that in this specific political context, that there are several things that this president has done that could be defined to me as objectively outrageous, whether it's proposing a ban on an entire religious class from entering the country, or paying hush money to a porn star, or going to Helsinki and telling the world that he trusts Putin's word over the word of the U.S. intelligence community. And I understand why Republicans sort of will reflexively push back and say that any criticism of the president is hysterical and it's outrage culture and everything else. But can you see how some of those incidents and others could fairly fall under that category of people being legitimately outraged at things that this president has done?
Sure, I guess. I'll give you some credit here for drawing this concept from my book into just making it about Trump. It was artful. It was skillful. 2 out of 3 of those things, are things Trump did when he was not president. They're outrageous. Sure, I agree. The cheating on your wife is outrageous. It absolutely is. I don't think I'm very clear in my book about what I mean by outrage culture. I think we can agree that certain things are not worth being outraged about, and certain things are. There's disagreements on the interpretation. So, like, you bring up the Helsinki thing. That's like ages ago at this point. So, like, I'm struggling to remember what was actually quoted and what the issue was. He does, he definitely has a tendency to for some reason to speak kindly about other leaders' words, and I don't know why. And I didn't try to defend it at the time, but it also, but I also note the entire context of what's happening, and this is what the left has a complete inability to do. I take a look at Trump's actions. Not just sort of what the stream of consciousness is that emanates from his mouth, which can be just, which can be outrageous. But I have to take that in accordance with his actions, and his policy actions are anything but pro-Russia. They've been far harder on Russia, objectively speaking, far harder on Russia than anything the Obama administration ever did. This is just a fact. So, you have to take that into context. And I think if you're going to be objective about criticism, then you have to contextualize it all. So again, I don't know if we're supposed to go down this rabbit hole, but you brought up those examples, so I have to use them. But pretty much every example you bring up, it's a hell of a lot more nuanced than I think the left likes to make it out to be.
Fair enough. So let me ask you, again, you're coming up on the close of your first congressional term, and it's always interesting, the before and after pictures of a freshman, somebody who arrives in Washington kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and idealistic and thinking that they're going to, take a bite out of the place and shake up Washington. Yeah, and then they well, and it's not everybody, but it's a lot of folks. And then, 2 years later, they're kind of dazed, realizing how screwy and sort of structurally flawed the entire place is. What has been the single most surprising thing to you in DC after this first term?
Always a question I get, and I never have a great answer for it. I don't think I'm surprised by a whole lot. I'm not surprised by the institution, the gridlock, any of that. I think the House operates as it's supposed to. It's very partisan. It's very emotional. It was meant to be like that. The things that concern me about Washington are the places that don't operate as they're constitutionally supposed to. The Supreme Court has operated with judicial activism for decades instead of simply interpreting the law and the Constitution as per the textualized written law. The presidency has gained too much power. The Senate long ago was changed to popular vote. So it basically mirrors the emotional whims of the House instead of being a representative of the states the way it is meant to be in the Constitution. These are the things that concern me, but these have long concerned me, and I didn't expect to change them as soon as I got up there. Law should not move forward fast when that law affects the entire country. It is meant to be contentious. We are not meant to have easy agreement between 435 people that come from all different parts of the country. And so when you know these things, first of all, it helps you realize that you should probably get more involved in your local politics. That's always what American life has been about. One of the wonderful things about federalism and checks and balances is that we can live together peacefully as a result. One of the scariest things is those, primarily on the left, that want all this power in Washington, and then to remove the institutions of checks and balances, and then basically create this system where we have 51% of the population telling the other 49% what to do. It's never what we were supposed to have. It's a recipe for divisiveness, not unity. See, they call it unity because we're all doing the same thing. It's not unity. It's divisiveness. That means 49% are getting whacked over the head. That's not okay. And so this is what I tell people, like when you exclaim, "Hey, get things done," just get things done. It's not meant to get things done that fast. You should frankly be a little bit grateful about that. There's definitely frustrations, right? Like, I don't understand why when Democrats know that they pass something out of the House, if they don't work with us, it can't get to the Senate and can't get to the presidency. We might agree on half of what's in that bill. I don't understand why they won't just remove the other half and let us pass what we all agree on and then feel like we all got to win. That baffles me, especially in coronavirus times, because this happened 3 times now. They've stopped coronavirus spending because it's just, in their words, not enough, not generous enough. Well, I can never outspend a Democrat. So, they can always use that against me. But why don't we just spend what we agree on? There's no disagreement on the actual substance of it. This should really concern the American people. That's surprising.
And to that point, I've got this long-running theory that makes me a favorite on the Hill. I just believe kind of foundationally that Congress has a personnel problem. And I remember having this conversation with a colleague of yours in Texas, Congressman Hurd, who of course is retiring. And he had a similar background to yours, not identical, obviously, but when he was in the CIA, he was delivering a briefing to a congressional delegation that had come to Afghanistan. And he remembers in that briefing realizing, wow, like a lot of these people are total boobs. Like I can't believe these are the people representing us. And when he got to the Hill, he realized it was even worse. And he and I had this conversation early on in his career where he realized that as he put it very delicately, that the caliber of individual in Congress was just much worse than he had realized. I got to ask you candidly, have you had that same realization?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I'm not going to cast stones on the entirety of it, but of course I feel that way about some members, and I don't feel that way at all about other members. So I guess yes and no.
Okay. Well, I mean, but which group is larger? Is it because obviously there's 535 of you guys? You're not gonna have a clean sweep one way or the other. But I mean, do you find yourself either encouraged or discouraged, relative to your baseline of expectations about the people who we send to Washington?
Yeah, a little bit discouraged. I am encouraged by, say, the large swath of GOP candidates, because that's what I pay attention to the most. Just large swath of GOP candidates that we're trying to send to Congress this year. Very diverse, very young. Keep in mind too, everybody comes with a certain skill set. Okay. I am going to look stupid if we have to have a really complicated conversation about banking laws all of a sudden, right? It takes some preparation time. I'm not on that committee. It's just, I work on different issues like energy and healthcare. So everybody kind of picks a major. So, it's a little bit unfair to say that Congress people always look stupid, because they might be really smart about one thing. They don't know everything about other things. This is why it's so important to elect people that are operating off of a base of principles. This is why I think I'm a Republican, because Republicanism basically means, one, you protect the institutions of a republic, not a mob democracy, not that whole 51% telling the other 49% what to do. This is extremely important for the stability of our country and allowing us to live together. Second, it's about protecting limiting principles. It's about solving problems within a given governing framework. This is really important. The left does not have this. They don't even claim to, right? They're all about goals. They're all about what they want to do, but they don't say how they want to do it. And we haven't done a good job explaining to people that conservatism is about the how. It's not that we don't want to solve the problems, but we will solve those problems in a much more responsible and sustainable manner. It won't be nearly as extreme as they want to do it. And so they're always going to be able to claim that they're the ones who want to take action, that they're more moral than we are. And they're always going to be able to claim that. But it's not how you would solve problems in your daily life, because there is no solution that doesn't involve trade-offs. There is no solution that doesn't involve second and third order consequences, and that doesn't maybe have detrimental consequences for the long term. We understand that. That's why I'm a Republican.
So you haven't been around politics long, but clearly you've been around it long enough to realize that you don't really get anything meaningful done without a coalition and without some compromise. You're a part of this huge freshman class. Obviously, Democrats make up the bulk of that freshman class by virtue of what happened in 2018. But I want you to give me a name. Tell me who you have become friends with, not just, not somebody you shoot the breeze with on the floor occasionally, but somebody that you actually talk to and communicate with and really feel like you've built a friendship with.
Yeah, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, Joe Kennedy and I talk, and he's very liberal. Look at his Twitter. It makes me cringe sometimes, but I know that I can talk to him in a reasonable way. My counterpart on a subcommittee that I'm a ranking member on, Xochitl Torres Small, she's, we have beers occasionally. And it's important to have, and a couple other freshmen as well that we have like real talks with. I mean, a lot of us went to Israel together. So you really get to know each other. Have I been jaded over the last couple of years? Yeah, I have, because I'll go to them sometimes, not to those that I named, but to others. I'll be like, you don't really believe, come on, guys, you don't really believe that there's a post office conspiracy, right? That you were willing to spend $25 billion to sell. And they'll say, yes, they do, even though it's been totally debunked. This has really disappointed me because, and again, not in anybody I just named. I just want to be clear about that. I'm talking about a couple others, although everybody voted for it on the Democrat side. So, but we still have conversations.
Let me close asking you something that feels like it's of increasing urgency to a lot of people, and frame it this way. You've written a lot and talked a lot about a couple of different things, about kind of ratcheting down the temperature in America and like getting everybody's hair not to be on fire anymore. And also this idea, as you noted earlier in this conversation, that you can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time, right? That may not be in perfect alignment. So there's one area where I'm sensing a lot of hair on fire right now with conservatives who I will interview and friends, family members. And it's this idea of a rigged election. It's this idea of mass absentee voting posing a threat to the integrity of elections. And it does strike me that here's an area where you can hold two competing thoughts. One thought, which is that you really don't like universal absentee balloting. But the other thought being that because it's been implemented in a lot of these states, red and blue states, that you're going to have some delays on election night. And so are you able and willing to speak to some of these concerns on the right and say, look, when we don't have a victor declared on election night, and if we don't have one for another 24 or 48 hours after, it's not because people are rigging ballots against Donald Trump. It's because we've got this funky new system in place with COVID and new laws being passed, and that you've got a lot of local election officials, Republican and Democrat, who are counting these ballots. That's what's going on here. It's not the deep state rigging this election against Donald Trump. Do you sense that when you talk with folks, and can you express that?
I mean, I completely disagree with you. So no.
You do? Okay.
I think it's highly dangerous. I think it's extremely dangerous, this playing with fire. It's one thing to talk about absentee ballots, and I know you were very careful with how you just worded that. Absentee ballots, fine. If you have to identify who you are, prove who you are, and request that absentee ballot, like we're doing in Texas, that's fine. I don't perceive a lot of problems with that. I don't like the path it's going. I think it's highly unnecessary. I just got back from HEB. All right, it's packed. Everybody can go vote. This is nonsense. I am tired of this nonsense conversation that it is not safe to vote. Dr. Fauci has said it is safe to vote. So I'm going to push back against this very hard. Here's the problem. And this is what is playing with fire. And journalists need to be more honest about this. This is the universal mail-in ballots, when every single household just gets mailed a ballot. If you think that's not playing with fire,
they're being mailed applications for ballots.
That is not true. In some states, that is not true, and you know it.
States that have already had the programs in place.
In Pennsylvania, they're doing it. In Nevada, they're doing it. And it's a disaster every time. Look, you're playing with fire here. This is a really bad idea. Have you ever block walked? Have you ever gone block walking for a candidate?
Canvassing, yeah, sure.
When you go block walking, have you ever come across a household where the name doesn't match the household?
Sure.
Of course you have. Everybody has. It happens all the time. So that means that household is getting that name on their ballot. So you expect the American public to believe that this is going to work out okay? I got into my runoff by 155 votes. You think it's not possible that just a couple hundred, even mistakes, all right? I'm not even saying there's some deep state fraud. So don't use straw man arguments against us on this one. This is a serious conversation, and I'm going to have a really serious discussion with you about it. This is playing with fire. Whether it's just mistakes made or intentional fraud being implemented, thousands of mail-in ballots have been thrown out in the past. New York just had a complete disaster. NPR analysis from July said that hundreds of thousands of ballots go uncounted each year because just for mistakes. In the worstly divided political times of our lifetime, you want to have an election where we can't trust the rules? Well, that is fundamentally and almost literally playing with fire. I can't believe anybody would advocate for that. I can't believe anybody would advocate.
I'm unclear on what the rules are that you're describing, because
so
again,
let me explain the rules. Let me explain the rules very simply and what they should be.
The states that have had universal absentee voting have had it for some time. They have not reported issues with it. States like Utah, red state, that has been doing
because
it.
Because you can't catch it. First of all, you can't catch it. And you just said absentee. Again, there's a difference between absentee voting and just mailing everybody a random ballot, isn't there? And you have to be an honest journalist, please. This is really important for people to understand. Your job is to inform the public at Politico.
I understand.
So I'm really going to press you on this.
So I live in Michigan.
Explain to people the difference between absentee ballots and universal mail-in ballots.
An absentee ballot in the state of Michigan, where I live, it is not mailed to you until you fill out an application requesting a ballot. You have to sign the application.
I'm fine with that.
Well, that's universal. That's universal absentee voting.
No, it's not. Stop saying that. You know that's not true. You guys you're the head. Man, you're a big deal at Politico. You've got to report this accurately. That is a different thing. I don't have a problem with you requesting an absentee ballot. You have to prove who you are, and then you get that, right? Okay, you're scared of COVID. I get it. I think that's a bad reason, but fine. Okay, If you're old, you can't make it to the polls. We have that in Texas. We've had it forever. This is different, and you know it's different. I don't know why we're even arguing about this. I think it's insane, frankly. So Pennsylvania, for instance, which is a swing state, is talking about mailing every single person a ballot, whether they request it or not. It's a huge difference because it's impossible to know if you're actually mailing it to the right person if they haven't even requested it. And I just use the example because we've all block walked and we all know that those registration lists are just not accurate. It's impossible to make them accurate. So you're playing with fire when you've undermined the rules of the game. And let's be honest, if we all moved to Mars and we created a new society and there was no Democrats, there was no Republicans, and our only goal was to ensure that we had a fair election and we knew that we could trust the outcome and that everybody got one vote for one person and we knew it was them when they voted, we would say two basic things. You should vote in person and you should have an ID when you vote so we know it's actually you. And yet so many states don't do this. California doesn't do it at all. It's very easy in California if you're dedicated to just go to different polls and vote. It's very easy. We've seen it happen. And to say that there's no evidence of fraud is nonsense. The Heritage Foundation has documented over 1,000 cases in the last few years, and this is like fraud that's actually been convicted. Okay, This is not the stuff that we don't even know about. And to say that it's a small percentage point. It's a small percentage. We win elections by small percentages. It is so important that we're able to trust the outcome of this election. And so this is why I push back so hard on this point. So no, I will not lie to people and tell them that, they should just trust it. No, I think it's up to you guys in journalism to actually explain this correctly.
So let me make sure I'm capturing what you're saying accurately. The isolated incidents of voter fraud that you were just referring to that have been convicted, we've read about them, that those exist, absolutely. But saying that people can't trust the process by which many of these states are now operating under, given recent policy changes in a lot of these states and given the COVID-19 pandemic and a lot of people not wanting to vote in person, those isolated incidents of voter fraud are different from a systemic effort to rig the election. I think we're both saying the same thing in that regard. No, I think the Democrat Party is intentionally trying to create doubt. I don't think they have some big, massive plan. It's impossible to create some giant conspiracy to have widespread fraud. But what they're allowing is their activists to get on the ground and actually make it happen one vote at a time. One vote at a time means your vote is canceled. And I don't care if it's 3 votes. Elections have been won by single digits, by tens of votes. Again, mine was 155 votes. This strange desire to make excuses for undermining the basic rules so that we can just be sure that we know the outcome is insane. And it's mostly insane, especially around times like this when we're so divided. And I cannot believe that our institutions in the media won't call it out. We have to trust at the end of this election that we believe the other side won. We have to trust that. Agreed. I can't imagine something more important than that. And these ideas that we have about universal mail-in ballots undermine that fundamentally. But
it's a terrible idea.
if that undermines it fundamentally, and you just said Democrats are trying to sow doubt, the president has said the only way he can lose is if it's rigged against him. And in fact, after he won in 2016, he said that there were 3 to 5 million illegal votes cast. His own task force on voter fraud turned up nothing. Republican and Democrat Secretary of State.
Yeah, well, guess what?
That
task force. No, stop it. That task force also said that universal mail-in ballots would be fraught with fraud and abuse. Don't forget that.
But I'm asking you on this question of sowing doubt. And the institutional distrust.
The doubt was sowed by that bipartisan task force that you just mentioned. The doubt has been sowed because I'm a logical thinker, and I know that if you don't have any rules to the game, then you can have doubt in it. And that's a really bad thing. I don't understand why this is the one institution that Democrats don't want any rules around. Why? Doesn't this strike you as a little suspicious?
No rules in terms of what? In terms of voter ID?
Democrats want regulations around every single industry and every single part of our lives, except for this one. Why?
I don't know. You tell me. What's your theory?
Yeah, I mean, because it's suspicious, and I think they want to create doubt, especially in this election. And I think they want to allow people to vote who don't vote, who shouldn't be voting.
But this goes back to the holding two thoughts in your head at the same time. Do you not also see the president creating enormous doubt?
Yeah, but he's using a logical thought to get to that point. Again, he's using this bipartisan, the conclusions of this bipartisan commission to get to that point. He's simply stating the obvious. And I've made the case to you extremely well over the last 10 minutes about why this is a concern. And you haven't refuted anything I've said. So
well,
I would hope that we can agree.
Absentee side. I'm not clear what's logical about
I'm not making a case. I'm not making a case against absentees. You can keep saying that and creating a straw man argument, but it's not true. I've been very clear. There's two different things we're talking about: universal mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. These are two different things.
So states that have no excuse absentee balloting, where anybody now can vote absentee, you seem to have a problem with that.
You can request a ballot. No, you can request a ballot. If you're requesting the ballot and verifying yourself, there's much less space for that fraud and abuse we're talking about. I don't know why I have to keep repeating this. You know what I'm saying here.
I'm actually trying to be clear on the specifics, because you do have a patchwork of different laws in different places. And the president had been highly critical of states like Michigan that were unsolicited sending out applications for ballots. And a lot of Republicans have been critical of that as well. But it sounds like you're saying you're okay with that.
We're critical of it. We're critical of that for sure, because it's totally unnecessary. And it's an attempt to get us to this universal mail-in ballot. So we see it as a bad idea. It is an unnecessarily provocative idea. Again, it's happening in Texas as well, or at least the attempts to make it happen in Texas. But the truly bad stuff is in states like Pennsylvania, which is a swing state, where you're talking about universal ballots just being mailed to everybody. Okay, can we report this correctly to the people listening, please, that there's two different things here?
Sure. Well, I would recommend a piece last week done by a colleague at Politico that goes state by state and explains all of the rules, all the regulations, all the procedures. You can find that on Politico.com. Congressman Crenshaw, we've gone over. I've taken up a lot of your time. We'll leave it there. I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, great to be with you, Tim.
Take care.